Welcome to The Deepest Cut, a podcast about the movement from painful experiences to meaningful music. I'm your host, Matt Connor. On a particularly inspired day in his home of New York City, Jay Lind realized it was going to be the kind of day he'd eventually document in song. It's not that it held anything out of the ordinary in terms of its events. Rather, his routine as a husband and father, med school student, and musical artist had unfolded with a handful of vignettes that stuck with him for various reasons, with chances to marvel at the mundane. This whole theme of finding beauty in the unexpected is a major theme of Jay's latest album, Alchemy, and it's certainly laid out in the song he chose to discuss on this episode of The Deepest Cut, a beautiful track entitled Generous. What's interesting about the song is how it provided a sonic challenge for Jay as well, to find a way to stay musically true to the emotions and unnerving realizations from the scenes that stayed with him. It finds its greatest resonance in his interactions with a patient who was confronted with a terminal diagnosis, one who insisted with real joy that, quote, God had been so good to him. If you're unfamiliar with Jay's meaningful music, Alchemy is a wonderful introduction to his catalog. The lyrics read like prose, and the music is layered and intriguing. Part of the excitement of this podcast for me is not only about these deeper conversational dives, but also the chance to introduce a listener to a potentially new artist. I hope that's part of the discovery for you here. On this episode of The Deepest Cut, I sat down with Jay Lind to discuss his years of experience as a hospice volunteer, his favorite songwriters, and the emotions and experiences of that inspired day in Manhattan. Here's our conversation with Jay Lind. Hello and welcome to The Deepest Cut. My name is Matt Connor and I'm your host. On this episode, I love this song and have loved this record, Alchemy. I'm here with Jay Lind. Jay, how are you doing on this morning?
I am doing well. There is sludge on the streets of New York right now, so I'm glad to be inside.
Right on. Hey, appreciate you carving out the time and space to do this. Hey, you mentioned New York. Is being in New York, was that a career decision for you in the first place to move there, be there?
Yeah, so it was a multiple career decision. So I was living in Nashville when I did my last record before Alchemy, and the pandemic really made it difficult to keep doing what I was doing musically there. And so during the pandemic, I kind of pivoted. I knew that I had another vocation I wanted to pursue alongside music, and so that's psychiatry. So I've been in medical school here the last 4 years. I'm getting ready to start my residency, and then it's a lot of juggling where I'm, when I'm not on a rotation, I'm recording or touring. And then part of New York too, besides the school option, the reason we picked this school, the financial piece was great, but also in a weird way, it was cheaper to live in New York than to live in Arizona or Nashville.
You're kidding.
Yeah, some of these old schools have a lot of money, and so it was actually a better deal for us. And on top of that, the New York music scene, a lot of my favorite songwriters grew up here, cut their teeth here. So it was too good to pass up.
What would make that list, by the way?
Leonard Cohen, probably at the top, followed by Sufjan Stevens, who was in Brooklyn. Obviously, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon. It could go on. A lot of New Yorkers.
That's a great list, by the way. Is New York, it seems like great fodder for the music with how much it makes its way into the scenes on the album. Does it feel that way for you? Like the great urban inspiration in some way?
It definitely does. I think, it's easy to, I play a lot of house shows, and, sometimes I say, I live in New York, and people say, I hate it there. And I'll say, when did you go? And they say, I haven't been. And so New York can be a polarizing place, but I think part of that is because it's so culturally diverse and rich. And I think living here as an artist, you just can't help but absorb whatever the edge of that cultural phenomenon is. And so it couldn't help but come into the album.
We want to talk about Generous. Can you take us into this song and maybe even the bigger picture of Alchemy and the way it fits into the framework of what you were trying to do on the whole project?
So the idea of alchemy, like I think like a lot of art, the beauty of it is you find what the thesis is as you do it. Like it's rare that I start a project thinking, okay, it's going to be about this. It tends to be I start writing and I find themes as I'm writing these songs and then start to follow those trails. And the main theme for this project that I found coming up in my songs was this idea of the beauty of the unexpected, the fact that many of my most meaningful experiences were not things that I planned or aimed for. I think, in the context of our culture, there's a lot of emphasis. I mean, I see it most among some of my more techie friends. There's this emphasis on optimizing and improving and making things better. And this album is a celebration of the things that we don't have control of, that are more chaotic, that meaningful things that come to us. And so for me, a big theme on the record is my marriage. I got married right as I was starting this album. And that was a relationship I was not interested in dating. Friends set us up on a date and ended up being a good fit. I could go on, many of my closest friends and family, I was not looking to make friends or family, but they kind of fell onto me. And so this song is another song on this record that does that, because it's about just a random day in New York and all this unexpected meaning that comes through.
I love the scenes that you set up here. There's some real, jarring juxtapositions, especially at the end. You're describing this scene where it says, I asked a man about the course of his terminal disease. He said, the Lord has always been good to me. And that's kind of this oft repeated refrain at the end. I would just love to dive into even that scene right there and like what you're trying to evoke within Generous.
I guess to set the scene for the song, it's funny because the song, it's a dramatic song, but it was just all I'm doing is recounting 3 or 4 events that all happened in the same day. Like it was, all of these things happened right after each other. And so it was a kind of profound day in that way. And again, I wasn't expecting or looking for any of those experiences. And so that in that final section, that's referring to, I was, after all these events that transpire that I talk about in the song, I'm rushing to get into the clinic. I said I'm in medical school and my job is to interview this patient. And I go through the checklist of things, any allergies, what medications are you on? How's your diet, exercise? And I get finally into the medical piece, and I hadn't had a chance to review the chart. That was part of the goal of the assignment. And he had a terminal cancer diagnosis. And I had just wasted 20 minutes of his time, being the medical student. And so I started to talk to him about that. And he said, he was of a different religion than I am, but he said, in his way, he said, well, God has always been good to me. God has always been good to me, even in the midst of it. And he had so much joy and patience, and I was stunned.
Through a day like that, when you said it was kind of 4 vignettes within this one day, did you kind of feel throughout the day, or was it very clear at the end of the day, like, man, I have to write about this?
It's funny. I was talking to my wife, Tori, at the end of the day, and I said, I'm just going to I usually don't journal. Songwriting tends to be more where I reflect, but I said, I'm going to write down what happened because I don't know how or when, but this is going to come out in my music because it's just such a strange series of events. And I thought maybe I'd have a song about one event and a song about another event, but it ended up just being all together.
The prompt for the podcast is choosing maybe the most personal or difficult song that you've chosen to record and release. What makes this one that entry for you?
For me, it's less, I have other songs where maybe some of the subject matter was more about my own personal experience. This song is more of, and this whole record is a lot of it's observing experiences. And what makes it raw for me though is musically, I wanted to communicate the rawness of what I felt that day. And so I really took it into this sonic space that I haven't gone before. And so that's why, to me, it came to mind as the deepest cut, because I'm trying to really be vulnerable in my performance and the instruments to communicate, just about the chaos and how unsettled I felt at the end of that day.
Can you talk about like even trying to capture that, how you capture that, the way you do that?
It's a challenge when a lot of the songwriting I enjoy is very, I named folk heroes. I enjoy folk music tends to be very, 3 chords and the truth. And that allows the lyric to really carry the song. Whereas alternative rock, which is one of my other favorite genres and is more where this song sits, the feel lots of times is not so much in the lyric, it's more in the music. That's a generalization, but I think the hard piece is to make, if you're trying to make a lyric carry the song while you're trying to make the song just explode, one can get lost in the other. And I think the way we made that work was to really kind of set the scene with the first couple verses and just focus on the storytelling. So there's this sense of, oh, I actually really want to pay attention to the lyric to see what this story ends. And then it happens to be in this wall of sound that you kind of still listen for.
Did you know like how this would end up in that way? Like, was the plan to kind of save that last vignette as this crescendo moment?
More or less, I wrote the piano piece that carries the motif that kind of carries the song, or the arpeggio. I wrote a while ago I was thinking of I wrote it while I was watching the ocean, and I just had this sense of this ocean flow, like the waves coming in and out. And I think once I had the story, I realized this song has to go there because the lyrics are going there. And once I had that idea, the whole song kind of came together quickly.
You have a pretty extensive background. You've done hospice work in the past. Can you describe that? And then it makes me curious about the ways that has influenced the art that you've created on the other side of those experiences.
So I was a hospice volunteer for about 5 years, and I did it in a few different states, mostly in New Jersey. And each week I would just go and see people, sit with them for an hour a week, an hour or two. Some people were nonverbal, so because they had a neurological problem, or maybe they weren't conscious in some way. So I would play music for those folks, and folks who could speak, lots of times I just sat and listened because it's a very vulnerable space where people are willing to share a lot. And that's a privilege as a songwriter who's, I don't want to sound too utilitarian, but who's looking for stories. And hospice is a place where you hear people's full stories. And I think there's a catharsis that comes with telling your story. And there's also a catharsis that comes with hearing someone's story. And so that definitely informed a lot of what I do musically. My first album with the tiger on it, For What It's Worth, is all inspired by stories from that world. But it still finds its way into the work I'm doing now, I think.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it would occur to me that maybe that sort of experience would open you up earlier in life to sort of a new level of vulnerability and honesty and like a rawness that maybe is missing from a lot of art that could be postured for the marketplace. I guess I just wonder, like, is that a real value for you? Is that something that came from that?
Yeah, I think, and I would encourage, anyone listening to volunteer in hospice first off, because there's so many ways you can get involved and bring your skills. And it is an environment that you can make such a difference in so many people's lives. For me, I was drawn to it because I had lost a family member around that time. And I also lost a friend who was about my age. So this was end of high school. And both of them had really positive hospice experiences before they died. And I thought, so there was this draw to serve in that way, but there was also a draw, just curiosity, because I hadn't seen death firsthand. And I had all these questions about how is death? Is death painful? Is death, what are the emotions that surround it? And what will that do to me being in that space? So there was both like an others and a self-centered piece to my motivation in terms of how that influences me. I don't feel like I understand death better. I don't feel like I know much more about the dying process, but I do think, to your point, there's a sense of contingency, this idea that so many of our activities in life are framed by the fact that we're going to die. And I find that very motivating and important thing to talk about. I think there's a terrible side to that, and there's a beautiful side. Like it adds a lot.
I'm just still so drawn to that idea because it just feels like so many of us don't even think about death, don't want to consider our mortality until we have to, we're just afraid of the whole space. By the way, did that impact medical school decision?
Certainly. In some ways, it moved me away from some areas of medicine because I thought, this is very sad. And also, there are a lot of things we can't fix or cure, but it moved me closer to psychiatry, which is what I'm pursuing. because there was this humanistic piece and there was this emphasis on the subjective experience of suffering, even beyond the objective reality of the diseases.
Is there a responsibility there for you within the music? Balancing the sorrowful with something hopeful? How much despair do you allow within a song?
Yeah, I don't think I think of myself as a hopeful songwriter. I don't think of myself as a downer. But that said, I've played a lot of these songs in like rowdy bars, and I know that they are downers. So I'm under no illusion about that in the span of the pop universe. But I think a lot of the lyrics, and especially like even the songs that have the end in desolation or end in sadness, the arc of the album, almost every project is trying to be, I'm not trying to write tragic albums, I'm trying to write comic albums, like comic in the sense of ending high, ending looking up or forward. So I do feel a responsibility, but it doesn't even feel like a responsibility to others. It feels like a responsibility to myself and my own faith. Like it wouldn't feel honest unless, if I was really having a hard time, maybe that'd be a very honest time to end on an album, very sadly. But generally I write albums partly to encourage myself and to reflect back at myself what I try to express in my faith.
I want to get to this song because it's beautiful, and I think people are going to be anxious to hear it and listen to it. I do also want to add, you have a family now. You mentioned medical school. I mean, how much are you able to tour? How much are you able to support? Or like, I would just love to give you a chance to kind of even tell us, like, creatively what's coming up for you.
Yeah, I'm a professional juggler first and foremost, because it is what's great about medical school so far, and this seems to be the case. Some specialties are more manageable than others too. Like psychiatry tends to be one of the more malleable specialties as opposed to like plastic surgery. And so for me, it's very much finding pockets for both. And in beneath that, though, every day before I do anything clinically, I do music and art. So I always try to spend close to an hour every morning. And sometimes that means I have to get up at like 4, especially with having a baby. That means I have to get up, 3. But that's, for me, it's a necessity. Like I think of them as vocations that are synergistic. I don't think, to me, they're kind of one thing, but I realize that that's not going to make sense in the world we live in. But I think that's part of an extension of my faith, is thinking like, I really feel called to be a songwriter and to be a psychiatrist, among, being a father and so on. In terms of what's on deck, I have a new album coming out in a few months, which I haven't told anyone yet, but it's coming. And then I have another album after that. Both of these things are pretty much written. And I don't know I do know the exact timeline, but I'm not going to say it in case things don't work out. But I have planned out like the next several years, like meticulously.
Wow. Is that due to the discipline, by the way? I mean, if you're playing yourself that much every day, is it just like I have a backlog and so I've got 2 albums worth?
Discipline, neuroticism, I don't know. I get very excited. I mentioned Sufjan Stevens. I get very excited by concepts. I'm not at this season of my creative life, I'm not a singles person. I'm very much like, I have this long form story I want to tell. And so once I have that story, I have to write it. And so I've written 2 of those long stories, and I'm about to start writing the 3rd. But we'll see when that happens.
Favorite Sufjan album, by the way?
My goodness. Karen Lowell is probably the magnum opus, or Illinois, but my favorite is Seven Swans.
I'm so glad I have a 7 Swans tattoo. No need to go into Sufjan Stevens on this. Hey, Jay, I would love to give you the chance to introduce the song and say anything else about Generous that you would like to.
I guess one more time. My name is Jay Lind. This is my song Generous, and I hope it serves as a candle for you in whatever season you find yourself in.
we took the train to get bagels in Brooklyn. They might be the best in New York. A man passed out onto the tracks when they rescued him. He almost went back for his phone. And you cried to me about the crack in the screen that this city won't let us ignore. It's all in your face till it gets to your brain and you can't see the spirits anymore. Oh, but I think it's time we get back to our dog. She'll be waiting for us. Oh, but I think we might feed her early. I'm feeling more generous. Scaffold, you noticed the vigil that I thought were candles for a sale. So I made a joke about the face in the photo. Said that must be why they don't sell. Oh, and you said, I don't think that those are for us, as I swallowed my tongue. But I think that was a kind way of feeling me. Generous.
You've been listening to The Deepest Cut, part of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. Audio production and theme music by Isaac Vining. Logo and identity work by Meg Cook. The Deepest Cut was created and hosted by me, Matt Connor. Thank you so much for listening.